Hello and welcome to Veg Around the World with me, Meenakshi Garodia, where I believe in simple recipes, authentic taste. In this show, we explore one country at a time through its vegetarian cuisine. The country for today is Israel. Now, Israel is particularly interesting because for the country, it's not as if it was a country for a very long time and it had a long history of cuisines, but its cuisine is made by all the people who emigrated into the country. You have the Ashkenazi Jewish people who came from Central and Eastern Europe. You have the Sephardic who came from Spain and that part of Europe. You have the Mizrahi who came from North Africa. And of course, being where it is in the Middle East, a lot of the food is actually very Middle Eastern and also almost Arabic. What's interesting is, so when I was debating about what to make for Israeli food, because one eats a lot of Israeli food, I'm living in a town where there are a lot of Jewish people, I was debating what to make, and a lot of the other cuisines are covered by the country they came from. So, I decided to almost completely make my food which is made in Jewish holidays. Now, there are very strict rules around what you can eat and what you can't eat, especially around holidays. So, it was particularly exciting because a lot of these things are not made vegetarian. So, it was extremely exciting to share this with you. I am going to be making matzo ball soup. Now, matzo is this unleavened bread, and the story behind it is when the Jewish people were leaving Egypt, they didn't have time to let the bread rise. So, they had unleavened bread, and the idea is this reminds everybody that this is a sort of hardship, and it reminds them that this is where you came from, this is the hardship you went through, and keep this in mind. So, what I am going to be doing is matzo balls. Now, it is almost like a dumpling, and I find that interesting too, because dumpling is there in so many cuisines, so many different. You have like something in India, you have something in China, Korea, Japan, and very often they come in soups. And so, there's a, instead of using chicken soup, which is traditionally you have matzo ball in chicken soup, I am going to be making a very nice, very hearty vegetable broth with some vegetables in it. And we are going to be making matzo balls, and they are very easy. Very often you get mixes, but a lot of the mixes actually are not exactly okay for Passover because they have baking soda, baking powder. Baking soda is allowed, but baking powder actually leavens your bread. Anyway, that is just a little bit of trivia. I am going to be making challah bread. Now, I love challah bread because I buy it and I make French toast of it. My whole family is crazy about it, and it is actually really easy to make. Bread is something people very often have a little mindset against, but if you just try it, maybe the first bread won't come out okay, but it is really fairly easy, and I am not going to let it rise twice, I am going to let it rise once, which makes it less time consuming. And last of all, not last of all, but I am also going to be making pickles. Now, pickles are a very Israeli thing. People love dill and garlic pickles, and you can pretty much put any vegetables you want in this recipe I am going to give you, and it is so easy. And the thing is, when you buy pickle from the store, sometimes you like it sour, you like it half sour, you might want it a little more garlicky, a little less dilly, a little more dilly. You can just put exactly what you want in it for yourself, and I am going to show you how to make just one can at a time. So, you can just you can customize it every time. And for the sweet dish, I am making this dish called Charoset. Now, you have two types of Charosets, you have Ashkenazi and Sephardic. I am going to go with the Sephardic, and it is so easy to make and it is so delicious. As always, I am going to start with the thing that takes the longest, and in this case it is the matzo balls and the challah bread. So, for the matzo ball we need two separate, we are going to be doing two separate things. One is making the actual matzo balls and the other is the broth. So, I am going to start off with the broth. I am going to start this on high, put some olive oil, I am going to let that heat up. Meanwhile, for the matzo ball itself, I am not making a very big quantity, you can double this quantity easily. I am going to be making just enough for like maybe 10 people. Matzo ball soup is really a complete meal in itself. When you actually add the matzo meal in it, which is crushed up matzo, you shouldn't work it too much. It is good to work it just a little bit. One of the things is because we can't let it become leavened or poofy, which makes it like fluffy and light, we are going to add things to make it fluffy and light. So, we are going to add some seltzer water or sparkling water. I am going to add slightly less than half a cup. And you can put either, normally they put schmaltz in it, which is chicken fat. Because we are making it vegetarian and I am trying to make it, in kosher law you can't mix meat and milk together, and typically because this is made in chicken, they don't want to put butter in it, because the commandment is thou shalt not cook a child in its mother's milk, which I love the idea of. I mean, if you are eating meat. Again, around a quarter cup of oil. Give it a good whisk. This I am going to add 1/4 of baking soda, which is allowed, and to make it just a little tasty, I am going to add a little bit of garlic. You know, you can make it more exciting. It does not have to be absolutely without taste, and I am going to add some salt. I am going to taste it later to make sure that it has got the flavoring I like. And once this is done, I am going to add around 1 cup of matzo meal. See, this is just crushed up matzo. So, some people are so observant that they won't even eat machine made matzo, which is considered kosher. And you just sort of work it in. Again, we don't want to work it too much, just enough so that it coagulates, because what we are going to do next is we are going to put it in the fridge, which will make it harder. If your mixture is too hard, it will not be fluffy and light. Essentially, you can have two types of matzo balls. You can have the sinkers and the floaters. Obviously, the floaters are much nicer because they float and are light and fluffy and yummy. Okay, I am just going to put this in the fridge. This is nicely done. So, I am going to add a cup of onions. Ooh. Half a cup of carrots, half a cup of celery, around a tablespoon of garlic, and some bay leaf. Give it a good stir. A little bit of salt. A dash of pepper. I always prefer freshly cracked pepper. It just has a better taste. I guess, you know, with everything, exposure to air makes things less tasty because the smell goes away. It probably oxidizes at some level. Once this has cooked a bit more, I am going to add broth to it. So, I am going to put this in the fridge, and I actually had made some earlier because this has to stay in the fridge from between 1 to 6 hours. So, I had made some earlier, and I am going to get that to show you the next step. We also add some dill, a good amount. Give it a good stir, and the vegetables look very nicely done. So, I am going to go ahead and add all the broth in it. Now, we are also going to add some water to it. I am just going to go ahead and add hot water so that it boils faster. That looks good, and we are going to let this heat up, and once it comes to a rolling boil, I will show you the next step with the matzo balls. Actually, I can show you now. So, what we are going to do is take a little oil in our hand, and a lot of people like their matzo balls big. I don't, because I like it very fluffy, and to make it very fluffy, it has to be cooked quite well. You just take some, and you try to work as little as possible. Roll it round, put it down, roll it round, put it down. It is going to become double its size. Now, when the soup comes to a rolling boil, we are going to add them carefully, 2 at a time. There are two ways of cooking matzo balls. You can cook it in salty water or in broth. I like to cook it in broth, especially when because it's vegetarian and you want as much flavor in your matzo balls as you can get. I have a transparent cover, but one of the things is you don't check on your matzo balls. You just let them go for at least 25 minutes. I think because these are smaller, 25 is a good idea. The bigger they are, obviously they'll take longer to cook. As you can see, right now they've all sunk to the bottom, and soon they should be, instead of sinkers, they should be floaters. Let's get started with our bread. For our bread, we're going to first get some active dry yeast, and because I only want to make it rise once, I'm going to not take too much. Now, challah is almost like a brioche, so I'm going to take around 2 spoons of yeast, 1/4 and half more, 1/4. A little bit of salt, not too much. Some regular water. I'll take. Mix this with hot water. You don't want to put the hot water immediately. And give it a good stir. This is going to get activated. Activated means the yeast is going to start multiplying. It's going to get frothy and white. For the bread, I'm just going to crack a couple of eggs. Two eggs to be precise. Add the oil. Again, you can add butter, you can add whatever you feel like adding. You're going to mix this with the yeast once it's activated and add the flour. Meanwhile, because the yeast is taking its own sweet time to get activated, I'm going to start preparing the charoset. Charoset, if you're making it the Ashkenazi style, you make it with walnuts, apples, maybe some honey or whatever you like. But in Separdic, you use more dried fruits. So I like the Separdic taste way better, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to take around 1.5 cups of wine. This should be a sweet wine. Actually, this wine is my favorite wine nowadays. It's a Spanish wine I've been having. And I'm just going to approximate it, but around 1 cup of dates. With 1 cup of raisins. And around a cup of apricots. You could also put peaches. I'm just using apricots. I like apricots. We're going to give it a stir and let it just boil away. I'm also going to put a little bit of cinnamon. You can put whatever spices you want. I'm just putting cinnamon because I think the fruits and wine and nuts are tasty enough by themselves. They don't need too much help. Just putting a little bit of cinnamon. Meanwhile, we are going to roast some nuts. So these are raw almonds. I'm going to take slightly less than a cup. I like a lot of nuts in this. You can see the nuts are getting a little brown. You don't want to burn them, but you want them to be a little toasted. You could also do this in an oven. You want to let the wine reduce a bit. The aroma of cooking wine, like mulled wine or spicy wine, and this has all the fruits in it, it's so good. So this looks nicely reduced. I'm going to turn it off. Meanwhile, the almonds are also toasted, so I'm just going to put them in a food processor and pulse them. That looks perfect. In this, I am going to add a little bit of salt. Actually, I like to add a little bit of chili too, but because I am making this, that is just my preference. I like my sweet with a little bite to it. We are going to take this and put it inside. Now, we are going to try to make a little paste with this. Now, the idea behind the Charoset is when the Jewish people were enslaved, in a way of speaking, in Egypt. This is the mortar they used for construction. So, it should be brown and muddy and pasty. You don't want all the fruit pieces gone, but you want it definitely reduced. Let us take a peek. A little more. That's good. This is a lot of nuts, but I like it a lot nutty. You can change the proportion according to what you like. So, traditionally, I forget exactly which religion, which occasion, but you have this with a really bitter herb, because you are supposed to have, you know, it is again one of those things that reminds you about how difficult things were. And I do not feel any need to add any honey or sugar. This is not super sweet, but I like it just the way it is. Like the Billy Joel song, I love you just the way you are. So, this is normally had with matzo or by itself. It is a bit hot, but let me try it. This is just right. I do not want to add anything to it. So, this yeast has activated a bit, but that is good enough. So, we are going to go ahead and add slightly less than 4 cups of flour to this. This is a half cup. Actually, I am going to add the eggs first to make it a nice liquidy mixture. We are going to have to use our hands in this soon. There is no way out of it. But bread, you use your hand. So, essentially when you add yeast or you let it leaven, what you are doing is you are making the gluten in the wheat do its work. Gluten strands, depending upon how long they are and how stretchy they are, that is what makes your bread really good. Working on this bread is pretty simple. Normally at this stage you mix it in and you can let it rise for a bit. I am just going to work it. You let it rise, then you work on it again, and then you let it rise again. That is called the double rise. I am just going to do the single rise. I added a little extra yeast for that. I am going to keep some flour on the side while I work it, flour my hands. You can see it is really soft. This is a bit like working with clay. It is a lot of fun. I am going to move this off. This is soft enough for me. So, what we are going to do, I will just knead it for a little bit more. So, in when you knead it, it activates the gluten, which is like leavening. Challah is leavened. When you work with clay, when you do this, you're basically pushing all the air bubbles out. In this, we are just making sure that it's nice and mixed in. Okay. Now, I'm going to just do the classic 3 braid, but it's very easy to do the 4 or the 6 braid too. So, you do this and you cut it into 3 equal parts. Put 2 aside and we roll this one into a long strand. If we'd already let it rise once, it would roll easier, and you can do that if you wanted to. You just, at the stage where you mix it, you just leave it in a pot and you let it rise for 20 minutes, it almost doubles in size. So, we are going to bake this at 325. I have just preheated the oven. We could also use oil instead of flour if you feel like it. I mean, at this stage there is no point trying to avoid the oil, because this has so much oil in it already. This is a treat. It is not a very basic. So, this one is much bigger. Perfect. They are approximately the same. I am going to turn off the matzo ball now. So, what you do is you take the 3 edges and you pinch them together, and then you braid it. Now, if you are somebody who has never braided hair, it is actually a lot of fun. So, you take the side, you get it to the middle and you drop it. Then you take the one on the other side, you get it to the middle and drop it. You can make it as tight as you wanted or not. That is a kitchen timer. And you tuck this edge inside and you pull it. The middle has to be thick and the side narrow. We are going to take this tray which has been previously greased, put our challah on it, and then we have to let it rise. Now, you can either cover this with a wet cloth or me with my shortcuts, because when you get wet cloth with dough on it, it is not nice to clean. So, I just take paper towel, fold 3 pieces, fold it in half, wet it, cover it, and we are just going to let this rise for maybe 20 minutes and then bake it for 30 minutes. It is done. I mean, after it is risen, we are going to just brush it with a little egg yolk and put some sesame, but it is done. Now, maybe the waiting time is a lot, but it is as you saw, it is such a simple recipe and it tastes so good. It is like unbelievable that you made something like this at home. I am going to serve the matzo ball soup. Now, you have to dig in deep at the bottom, because you do not want to spoil the balls, and normally you give 2 with broth. Now, while we are waiting for the bread to rise to around double its size, we are going to make pickles. Now, in my Korean episode, I made kimchi too, which is essentially like just pickled cabbage instead of pickled cucumber, but it is so easy. Buy yourself an airtight jar of some sort. We are going to take garlic, and you can cut it, but I just like to crush it because it gives it more flavor. Put around 2 garlics at the bottom. Put 1 sprig of dill. Now, one good tip about preserving dill is very often they come with roots. So, you just put it in a glass of water and you cover it with a plastic bag, and somehow that keeps it fresh. I like my pickled dilly with a lot of dill. And then we are going to stuff as many cucumbers as we can in here. I have cut them a bit short because I do not want them reaching the top. I think I might be able to squeeze one last one in. All right. We are going to take a glass of water. Mix 2 teaspoons of salt and vinegar is what keeps it crunchy instead of soft. So, how much vinegar you put depends upon how crunchy you like it. I am going to put 2 teaspoons. I like it crunchy, and you just stir it in. You could also heat this mixture and cool it down and put it. It makes it ferment faster. Otherwise, you can just put it like this. Make sure the salt is dissolved. We pour it on top. We leave just a little bit. I am going to put 2 pieces of garlic on top. And some more dill. There, our pickling is done. You shut it. And there are 2 ways of doing this. You can either keep it in the shade or the sun. I like to do it in the sun because it makes it ferment faster, and you could you keep it for 3 days, you taste it. If you want it even more sour, after 3 days it will probably be like the half sour, and when you keep it longer it will be sourer, and then you put it in the fridge. We are all set. There we have it. I was saying the challah is supposed to have 12 strands for the 12 different tribes of Israel, and you have some matzo bread with some of this. You can dip your soup, you can dip your challah in your soup, you can have some nice matzo soup and accompany it with coffee. This is seriously good. Bon appetit.